Imagine sitting at a table being part of a campaign where all of your decisions get made for you. Your backstory gets adjusted to appease a power-tripping player with main character syndrome, and that same dude throws a temper tantrum and forces you into a PvP battle. Well, imagine no more, because that, along with plenty other horrors, happen in this story. But even with all of that, this story still has a happy ending. I mean, unless you're not a fan of problem players receiving some well-deserved karma. Oh man, this has turned out to be one of my favorite stories, but without further ado, let's get into it. I was told to write this experience here since this was my real first horror story and should share it with others that may have gone through the same thing. It isn't all bad though, since that guy had it blow up in his face by the end. This is a story about a railroad, the rest of the party being turned into pawns, and an explosive finale that results in the DM ending the campaign. To set the stage, I joined this gaming group essentially comprised of family and friends. There was about 5 of us, but I'll only list the ones that are more important to the story. Me, the Dragonborn Barbarian. Stabby, just a little old goblin ranger. And who we will refer to as Protag. It is me, the almighty human paladin. Ah ha 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 ha. We've all played D&D before, but only Protag and myself were what I'd call veterans of the game. I hadn't played in an in-person game since 2020, so I was very excited to be a part of this one. The game starts off normally enough. We all introduce our PCs and the party gets a rhythm going. I would honestly say these intro sessions were great, lots of roleplay, team bonding, etc. But it all changes when the paladin's backstory kicks in, and now Protag is some chosen one of his holy order. We all don't think too much of it at first, but over time, his story ends up overshadowing everybody else at the table. He gets crowned the leader of our troop, had a story beat in all of our backstories, and important enemies who were described as near death 5 rounds ago only go down on his turn. Some were even backstory villains that had nothing to do with him, yet it seemed like every encounter was catered for him to deal the final blow. Since we were playing in a setting largely comprised of humans, Stabby and I were often made to work harder or secluded from RP sessions and meetings with important NPCs. As the story progressed, we even had to pay more for potions and items unless Protag was with us. Only him. Not any of the other players who were also humans. Now let me explain. I don't mind a setting that has these kinds of social dynamics in them. In fact, I find them interesting. I can understand if there are injustices in a D&D setting since most DMs do this so PCs can make a difference outside of combat scenarios. But since we were at the whims of Protag, who was more focused on his own power, we never really got around to those out-of-combat opportunities. He would even use this world-building footnote against our characters later when he felt we were stepping out of line. How dare you! I tried to just roll with it since I was getting an in-person game and half of the people were my family. I didn't want to ruin it by being a mope. I mean, I had already kind of checked out due to all the sidelining, but Stabby, my cousin, was getting sick of it. She started getting a bit more vocal about the favoritism. This may have provoked Protag to lean further into his ego as he didn't appreciate her criticizing his arc. It's a bit late, but now it's here that I should mention that Protag is the friend of DM, who in turn is a friend of my other cousin. Before this, half of us didn't really know him. It's my belief that Protag's behavior only began to change after he got more comfortable with us. So at this point in the story, it was just a bit of a drag, but as time went on, things got a whole lot worse. Protag got crowned as king of a new nation that he formed. Now, if everyone was a side character before, we were all pawns now. Barely any of us got any time to do anything significant outside of roles, as much of the RP was taken up by Protag. The rest of the party had already given up on our backstories, which honestly was the most depressing thing about this so far. We were nearing what I'd call the end boss of the mid-arc. The party had just dethroned an evil wizard king, and Protag was doing his Protag screen time interrogations. Most of us were checked out since it had been about 8 minutes of just the DM and Protag talking when the DM suddenly made the Wizard King try to kill one of the other PCs. This was meant to be an epic in-game moment, I presume, but it would end up being the catalyst to the campaign's end. One of us tried to counterspell, but it was too high of a level and they failed the roll. So in turn, we asked what the spell looks like, and it was described as something along the lines of, you all know it's power word kill. So what do you all do? This is the voice that I decided to give this DM, and by the end of this, you all will understand why. Now we're all paying attention. DM lets us roll initiative to try and RP our way out of this. Kind of like a slow motion bullet time intervention. Stabby ends up rolling the highest. She quickly knocks an arrow, pulling the string back and lets it fly, hitting her target, and the Wizard King is dead. We all start to out of game celebrate because this was the first boss kill she'd gotten since forever. But Protag suddenly marches his paladin ass up to Stabby and says, "You fool!" Now, we're all shocked by this. Then suddenly, the Wizard King rises as a lich due to some magical stuff, and we have to run for our lives. We escape back to Protag's castle, where he's going off about how you royally screwed up my plan. It is then explained that he and the DM had played a few one-on-one sessions without us, and the Protag had information the rest of us couldn't have possibly known about. He was also given an amulet that would have allowed him to imprison the soul of the Wizard King and gain new spells if he had delivered the killing blow. Stabby then says something like, "Big deal. It's not like you needed more power anyway." But that didn't sit well with Protag since his character was serious and deep, while her character was built off a joke. At this point, his anger started to bleed into real life, and he and Stabby were getting a bit heated. Stabby, being the mature one, leaves the conversation in game. The awkward table atmosphere leads to the party all leaving the castle to do their own things, leaving Protag and myself alone in his throne room. I think, hey, maybe I can RP now to progress the story and maybe get it into Protag's head that he should have maybe told us about these important notes. So I try to speak, but he is having a hard time calming down and dials it into his RP. He calls us all useless and keeps on moping about his now missing power-up. I try again to reiterate that, if this was so important, why didn't you tell us? And that is when he attacks me. Yup, just strikes my character, saying something like, "I am king, I owe you all nothing." DM is a bit shocked, but allowed it. I think it's just a one-off, but nope. He's taking his annoyance out on me. So I make my barbarian rage and I try to flee, but he uses some magical stuff and locks the castle exits. The other players are trying to act now, but Protag says, "You all left. There is no way you know what's going on." I suggest we end the game here, but Protag forces DM to continue since he is having fun again. So I just keep running, trying to survive while locked in with this overpowered chosen one chasing me throughout his castle. I briefly think of just letting him kill me so I can drop the game, but then I remember something important, something that could change the course of history within this city, this region, this world even. Something that could force this arrogant king to face his own mortality. For this, we have to go back. A few sessions ago, we had stopped a band of pirates from blowing up a port. Protag had taken all of their gunpowder in order to try and homebrew some new firearms for his army. I knew right where it was. I ran straight to the cellar, hoping that he'd follow me. To play it up, I leaned into the fact that my barbarian was half healthed, and I said, I called to the cellar and I tried to hide. It isn't long before Protag corners me in the cellar and starts to repeat this mantra he always uses whenever he's about to kill a big bad. I use my turn to stand up to my full height, activating my Dragonborn's chromatic warding, raising my chin, looking him square in the eyes as this frightened look fades and is replaced by this snarling confidence as I say, I am only going to say this one last time. Back down now. Just jumping in real quick to say, if you're not subscribed, subscribe. It's free. All right, let's get back at it. He uses his turn to RP some random on-the-spot reasoning as to why his character is suddenly being so violent against mine, leaning heavily into the views this homebrew world has about non-human species. Now, at the table, I'm pretty chill about this, so he thinks it's no big deal that he's going to kill my PC. He asks me if I'm ready to roll a new character. I even have suggestions on what you should bring to better blend with my kingdom. Oh man, I know it's coming. And oh, what an arrogant prick. Ah, shit. Anyways, his next turn, he attacks me. I'm barely alive due to barbarian rage at this point, but it's all I need. On my next turn, I use my breath weapon attack on the room and light up the cellar full of gunpowder, making sure not to avert my gaze so that it is my dragonborn face that is the last thing this arrogant king sees. Now, in the previous session where Protag had gotten his gunpowder stock, Protag had ruled that each exploding barrel was equal to one fireball spell, which the DM allowed. Realizing now that all his barrels were lighting up in his face, he tried to rule that they're more they're more akin to alchemist flame. So I mean, they totally don't do that much. So on with the fight. Okay, I added a little bit there, but fuck, I love that voice. It's so stupid. But with me and the other players having a laugh at the whole experience, we forced the DM to stay true to his previous ruling. The DM nervously looked to the Protag and agreed. And so the dice began to roll, baby. Now he collected 50 of these things, which are all essentially base level fireballs. At max, both he and I would be taking a total of 2,400 fire damage, and at worst, 400 fire damage. Even with his magic items that halved spell damage, there was no way he could survive this, especially with us only being level 8. I, on the other hand, being a red dragonborn who had activated my level 5 chromatic warding feature, was outright immune to fire damage. And that was that. Protag was dead, burnt to a crisp due to about 1,000 or so fire damage. It was of course rolled using a dice app since none of us had that many d6s. I stepped out of the burning hall like a corny action movie, and the DM promptly ended the session. For a while, Protag skimmed through his sheet and mine in order to try and find some loopholes, but came out empty-handed. About a week later, the DM messaged our chat and told us he was ending the game. Apparently, he didn't know what to do since Prodag's character was dead. He had written so much of the plot around him that there was nothing else he could think of. I said we could just retcon the previous session, but he just wanted to end it. So I'm without an IRL party again, but if it wasn't for my family also playing there at the table, I would have left many sessions ago. Honestly, blowing him up was the most fun I had at that game outside of the opening. It was a drag and none of us had signed up to be a pawn in someone else's power fantasy game. I never talked to the guy again because we never really talked outside the game in the first place. The chat died and we all just moved on. I don't know too much about Protag, so I can't in good conscience say he was a complete asshole to the core, but I can say he was at least a bit too full of himself and someone I wouldn't want to game with moving forward. TLDR, player becomes chosen one and power trips the rest of the party into the background. Starts a PvP round with me, so I blow him up with his own stock of gunpowder. Game ends because too much of the plot was written around the now dead protagonist of the D&D game. Update? So after posting this, the author read some of the comments and did update the post. I see some of you asking about the DM, so here's what I can gather about them. As far as I know, they've been a DM before, but I don't know if I'd call them an experienced DM. I think the main issue here was that the DM was a bit of a yes man when it came to their players. I remember someone asking something like, so when is the protagonist's arc going to be done? And he said something like, soon. But yeah, it never really ended. In the end, I think it was just more of a lack of self-confidence to deny any of Protag's wants. I do wish them the best though, since the start was promising. They just needed to develop a backbone when up against aggressive players. Now, I have very specific rules that I set in place on session 0. I make it very clear that there are 2 factors that need to be in play when a PvP battle is happening. 1, whoever is in this battle needs to be okay if their character loses. And 2, everyone involved has to want to PvP, and if they don't, then I don't allow it. I just don't think it's fun when a player is forced into PvP. This story is packed full of elements of horror, and it really is honestly one of my favorites, but I love any story where someone gets their just desserts. Oh man, once again, I am glad I wasn't a part of that one, and I'm sure you're glad too. Now, if you like this one, give it a like, and if you're not subscribed, subscribe. It's free. If you want to recommend a story, share one of your own, or just say hi, come by the Big Jesse Discord. The link is in the description down below. Thank you so much for watching. Later.